supporting this event. So this event is on public banking and the role that it plays in building trust in communities of color. And we have with us today George Riley, who's going to be presenting to us. And for those of you who don't know George, he's been a staunch advocate for very progressive values in building our community. In 2005, he founded Citizens for Public Water. And then I guess it evolved into 2013, where he helped found Public Water Now, which was instrumental in protecting our water and working to have us evolve into a public water agency as opposed to private water agency, which we are currently having on the Monterey Peninsula. He was an intervener at the CPUC for ratepayer advocacy from 2008 to 2018. He has been incredibly politically active, managing campaigns for Brenda Lewis for the Water District Board in 2011. He's co-managed Measure O for Tight Loss for buying Cal-Am in 2014. He helped manage Molly Evans' campaign for her win in the Water District in 2015. He's just been a force. I've got a whole list of his incredible criteria, but I know we're really here to hear more about public banking. But I will say though, having worked with George and he, in his Public Water Now campaign, he was in a strong push and advocate for the Measure J win to buy Cal-Am in 2018. And in that race, Cal-Am spent over $2.5 million in a 20-to-1 ratio for Public Water Now. So he definitely has the capacity to motivate people and really build citizen activism to make very progressive changes. So it's really a great pleasure to have him here with us. I will say currently though, he's on the board of directors of League of Women Voters of Monterey County, which he's been on for 10 years. He chaired the Peace Coalition of Monterey County for 2 years, active with Veterans for Peace, Progressive Democrats of America, Green Party, and many other political campaigns. And in his off time, as if he actually manages to get that, I don't know how, he is a painter. And in our pre-conversation, he shared with me that he's going to be having a show in Cannery Row kind of soon. So you can hit him up for more information about that later on. And with that, I think that we can go ahead and jump into our public banking discussion. George, why don't you take it away? Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. The subject of public banking has been attractive to me for not a long time, but when I heard about it and then did a little bit of research, and I've since joined a working group that's kind of a 5-county working group, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But what's exciting to me about public banking is that, first of all, it has enormous potential at the local level. Second, it promotes local control, which is a high priority for me in terms of what I am interested in. There are serious money reasons why this is a good idea. And kind of the last reason I would say is it's a positive thing. You're not against something, you are for something. and I think, those of us who are activists in general, there's some pipe dreams that you do want to support, but they're more like pipe dreams, and it's hard to find steps to go forward. And then opposing things just it's a different animus that activates the soul. This is positive, and so that's a real key thing for me. So let me just jump right in. Public banking. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, public banking is now a law. The law actually in 2019, very recent, the state legislature and the governor agreed that we ought to consider public banking, and we ought to set the rules on how that might evolve if local areas are interested in it. So my slide number 2 basically is to say the law authorized 10 new public banks. They're generally either urban banks, big city banks, or a regional construction of different counties, a few counties and so on that might come together to do that. So they authorized both of those. It's based on public agency participation or membership or sponsorship. It's not a customer bank, which I'll get into a little bit later. And the law allows agencies to place some of their money into the investment in a public bank. And all of this represents an opportunity, just a fantastic opportunity that we've never had before. So that's what really is exciting to me about, and it's the opportunity and the positiveness that I'm really enthused about. So what is a bank? What is a bank? Well, we kind of generally know that it's where I go a lot, but we may not just know it. So let me just summarize. They collect deposits from many people. They pool those deposits for leverage. Leverage is how you lend money out. And the lending is collateralized. Collateralized means there's a backup, a surety that the loans will be replaced. Not every loan will be replaced, but if you're a good bank and if you're a good project and if the project is good, you will get 95% of the payment back. So that's what banks do. They're in the business of making money. So they earn fees and they earn interest payments. So that's how they make income. And they operate within regulations. And just as a reminder, they generate income. The income belongs to those that participated, basically, which are the public agencies. It's not a public, but it's the public agency that benefits from the income. So next slide, please. So what is a public bank compared to just any normal bank? First of all, it's fully chartered like all other banks. So it's got to meet all the regulations for any normal bank. And there's a pretty rigorous review process before it ever gets chartered. So any public bank is going to have to go through that process. But what's different about a public bank? It's a public owned bank. The public entities own it. So cities, special districts, counties become the owner of the bank. And it's a lending bank. It's not a customer service bank, which I'll get into just a little bit more, but it's a lending bank, means a project bank, which means specific applicants will be able to finance a project. But it's not like an individual who wants to buy a house. That's not the kind of bank this is. And it specifically prohibits competition with credit unions and community banks. And these are all community, locally owned, locally focused banks anyway. So that's what a public bank would do. It would be locally owned, locally focused, and the law says you can't compete with those that are already in that realm of loaning, that realm of collateralized lending. So you can't compete with them. You can cooperate with them. You can maybe share the resources on how you might go forward, but you cannot compete with them. I don't know how that gets applied or defined or whatever down the road, but you can't do that. You just can't do that. Next slide, please. Well, let me just back up and say the structure of my presentation tonight is I'm going to go to about 10 or 12 slides, and then I want to stop for a little bit of Q&A period, and then I want to pick up on a few more details. So, okay, back on this. What does a public bank do? So it finances public agency projects. So it means the project that's subject to the lending opportunity is a publicly sponsored project. It's a public agency, a city, a special district must propose this kind of project. So it doesn't come from the private sector. It doesn't come from developers. It doesn't come from just any old business. And I don't mean just that any old business. I just mean the world of loaning in a public bank is to support a public agency project. So it's got to be spearheaded, initiated, sponsored by some public agency. The way it gets financed is it capitalized from pooled money. The pooled money is pooled from other agencies. So the public agencies, I'll get back into this too a little bit, but that's how they capitalize a bank, is from a variety of agencies that participate, and then they pool some of their money. They leverage that pooled money for local loans. And again, it's a little bit redundant here, but the bank earns income. They have lower interest costs because they're not serving the profit motive. They have lower fees, same reason, not serving the profit motive. It provides local control. It addresses local priorities because it's the local jurisdictions that propose it. And then a bank in general must assure liquidity and security of the assets that they're managing. So this is built into the security, the protection, the confidence that you can have in a public bank. Next. So what kind of projects might be a local project? And it's a little bit limited in what's limited. It looks like it's not limited, but I just want to make sure that that you think big on what the local priorities are or what local projects might be. Infrastructure obviously is very obvious for any public agency. Roads, bridges, water systems, sewer systems, coastside kind of protection or whatever, flood control. Affordable housing, big issue. I'm going to get back to that in a little bit later. Serve the underserved. Those are the three dominant priorities that's generally described as how a public bank, what a public bank may do, what projects they might consider. But then just keep going on because it's allowed under the public banking law. Loan assistance for business. Well, what kind of businesses? Well, it can be loan assistance for diversity. It can be loan assistance for social justice projects. I'm just going down the list. There could be COVID economic recovery projects that a city may be interested in. Climate change projects, McCum. It is definitely cheaper financing, so there's an attractiveness about that. It avoids Wall Street speculation with their money. I'll get a little more into that too. It allowed divestiture policies, means if you don't want to support cigarette companies or you don't want to support armament industries, you don't support fossil fuels, you can make sure that the investment of the money that's in this bank can be limited or percentage wise restricted to what you do. And it obviously is available to respond to emergencies. And every city has that potential anyway. And this just gives another mechanism with a larger sum of money that might be available for emergencies. Let me just, before I go too far on, let me just throw out a few other things. It could perhaps deal with broadband, expanding broadband capability in your area. It could support undergrounding. It could support renewable energy in some ways that ties into maybe the what is it, Central Coast, the community power. It could support employee-owned businesses, for example. Just because you may be interested in how do you build community, a city may want to build community. They may want to loan toward business opportunities that reflect an employee-owned business. It's just one more idea. I'm not proposing it. Co-ops in general, which is kind of a community-based structure. Anyway, I just want to keep you thinking that there are lots of opportunities. So next slide, please. So is public banking a new idea? Absolutely not. The answer is no. The countries that I've listed here, Germany, Australia, India, China, Brazil, France, they all have public banking. And in fact, globally, about 40% of all banks are publicly owned. How many banks in the United States are publicly owned or considered a public bank? Only one. Only one. It's the Bank of North Dakota. And they formed this about 100 years ago. So just imagine 1920. You got to go back a long way to find out what the hell was going on then that got them to do it. Well, they just decided that they would prefer to have a locally owned and operated and locally focused financing structure for the economy in the North Dakota and within the state. But now, just go beyond that. In the United States now, over 20 states have active or in an active review process for public banking. And just in California, and I've seen studies on some of this, San Francisco, LA, and so on, are actively looking at this. And so now I'm proposing that our county should actively look at this. Next slide, please. So if North Dakota is the only one in the entire country, and the push now for public banking in our area, it's a Central Coast focus. There are 5 counties that are in this kind of working group, and so the Bank of North Dakota, the entire state population is 750,000 people. That's the entire state population. Now, add up the population of our 5 counties, and the 5 counties, Santa Barbara, Monterey, San Luis Obispo, Santa Cruz, and San Benito. That 5 county has 2 times the population of North Dakota. So if North Dakota can support a public bank with that population, and we have twice that. I just think it should be an easy argument that we're able to support a public bank in this region. And that is the focus of the advocacy from the planning group, is to address the 5-county area, which I've just identified here, just so you know, from Santa Cruz down to Santa Barbara. Next. So in order to get a public bank operational, there are a few steps, and I just want to summarize here, and I'll get into this a little bit more. So they're looking at a 5-county structure. The only way you can create a 5-county structure is with the Joint Powers Authority, because nothing exists right now. I'll get into community power in a minute, but the only way a public bank can work at this point is to have a Joint Powers Authority composed of the various jurisdictions that are interested. You need to fund the startup costs, and that may or may not be a significant issue. In order to capitalize the bank, which means the money in the bank that can be loaned, the money's kind of available. It's in existing reserves in public agencies. I'll get into that a little more in a bit. And then you have to file for the state charter and get it approved. So these are basically the outline of going forward. You need a structure, you need a government structure, which is Joint Powers Agency. Then you got to be able to cover startup costs, and then the initial capitalization, and then get an approved charter. Next, please. So what's going on right now? The 5-county planning group, we call ourselves the People for Public Banking Central Coast. That's the 5-county group. There are representatives now of most of the counties. Some are more active than some of the counties are more active than others. But the Santa Cruz supervisors just recently sent a letter. It was a week ago, and they sent the letter to all the supervisors in all 5 counties. Well, not Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is already kind of in play. So the other 4 counties, they sent it to all city elected officials, mayors and council members, and the city manager or chief administrative officer for the jurisdiction. It went to all the supervisors and all the city elected officials. And the letter asks for something. Are you curious enough to show an interest? And if you are, can you kind of make a statement that you're interested in showing interest, and let us know so we know what we're working with. And then if you can name an agency rep for follow-up, because there will be some follow-up work among all the jurisdictions. There's no commitment of money. The request from the supervisor, from the Santa Cruz supervisor, is if you're curious enough to get started, then let's get started. We're not committing, we're not asking for any money. Granted, there's a money issue down the road, but right now, if you're curious enough, please let us know so we know what we're working with. Next slide, please. And this is where I want to make a particular point. The Central Coast Community Energy, which used to be Monterey Bay Community Power, that is an absolute parallel of what we're talking about for a public bank in the 5-county area. It's the same 5 counties that they have. They do participate. The community energy staff participates with our 5-county working group. So we're getting their input on what they did and how they did this, and getting some feedback and so on. And they're interested in participating in some fashion about how this whole thing might work. I think they're an absolute perfect model for forming a regional JPA, Joint Powers Agency, because they pioneered this on how do you get a multi-county, multi-jurisdictional agency that is a governing board and accountable to the public, and be effective in generating something. In this way, it's power, of course, power and energy. They had a very professional approach. They presented their question and their solicitation to elected bodies across the counties. They gained community support. They gained agency participation, and they had a successful launch of their new agency and the intent of what they're doing. I still hear a little criticism of the high salary levels, but I just add that because I do hear that periodically. And that may be something to watch out for as we move forward. It doesn't matter at this point. They're a perfect parallel of what we're doing, and they've shown that it can work. And there may or may not be some tweaks that we may want to do something around the public bank side, but nevertheless, they're a great parallel. And so next slide, please. And this is my last slide before I want to break. So what, besides what the Board of Supervisors of Santa Cruz did in notifying the officials, what we're asking the public to do is to also call your county official, but particularly the city officials, and just ask them, could you please explore public banking? Would you please adopt a resolution of interest or support or whatever? Again, there's no money involved at this point. It's just trying to pursue the curiosity about how this might work. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for local government. And I'll get into some of the money reasons in a few minutes. But also asking community groups, would your own group adopt a resolution of interest or support or whatever it is? Again, there's no money involved. This is a matter of just kind of getting your name into a list of agencies that might be supported. Getting the local community groups involved was hugely important to the San Francisco process and to the East Bay process. And those two, at least in our area, are the two areas that are most farther along on this issue. And it's encouraging to see this. It's also exciting to see it. And we're all kind of in the same boat, moving in the same direction. And some are a little bit ahead of us, but we want to catch up. That's kind of my thought. So Lisa, I just want to stop for a moment here before we go into the money stuff and see if there's some questions or things that people have some questions about.
Okay, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and feel free to raise your hand or just go ahead and ask them out. I don't see any hand raises.
Well, I'm sure they'll have some questions after the next part.
Yeah, sure.
George was looking for some questions, so you'd have a chance to take a breather here. Too bad, George. Go ahead.
Take a break.
Oh, wait, hold
Hi,
on.
everybody.
I just heard somebody. Go ahead.
Yeah, Matt.
Hi, George. Hi, everybody. Lisa, thank you for having this. And I'm certainly very interested in this. Been kind of waiting for a little while as this kind of has evolved and stuff, just waiting for it to pop up. So I'm really pleased that others have really taken leadership on that. And I've heard good things about this in concept, but it's very exciting to see something like this happen here regionally and potentially. So I have a lot of questions. I actually used to run a CDFI out of the South Bay area. And so I have an idea of what lending operations look like, particularly civically oriented and mission oriented community development lending. And it's very rigorous and very challenging, particularly in high cost areas. And so one of my questions is, and that was more for lending for first time home buyers and community projects of housing related. I know this is different, more public infrastructure that potentially is in support of housing. But one of the questions I had was, is there a threshold for this public bank to meet in terms of addressing and meeting just basic baseline thresholds for public benefit in terms of a target income group? I think you're familiar with, CDBG has 80% has to benefit 80% AMI target group as an example. So is there a baseline kind of, how do we define what public benefit looks like in this world of public banking?
It's not defined. The only projects they can fund are projects that are sponsored by a public agency. So it could be a special district, could be a city, could be a county. And so that's the limit. It's got to have the public sponsorship, public agency sponsorship. Those sponsorships usually come from their city council approval of a project going forward. And then how it gets financed may be different choices about how they might go. But no, there's no limit that 80% of the money has to be this or 20% or that or a certain category of projects. It's got to be a public agency sponsored project, period. And that's self-limiting because in some ways, loans to businesses, the redevelopment era is over with, but they loan to businesses all the time, or loaned and built projects that supported the business environment. I'll say it that way. And maybe that's what infrastructure does, but also how do you build a quality community? And that's kind of the limit. How do you build your community?
Yeah, and I'll let others dive into. My last quick question before I know you have other detail was, in terms of the result, right, and the public benefit and what that looks like. As an example, most CDFI lending has to benefit, most of their loan funds have to result in a benefit to the 60% AMI households, right? And so, one of my reasons for being interested in this, and I think a lot of other people, particularly people of color, are going to be interested in, like, how do we leverage this new resource for community projects that will benefit people that have historically been shut out of infrastructure improvements and investments in the past. And so it just seems kind of awkward to me that we're starting with a blank slate. That's fine, but I think that if we're going to have something meaningful, then we should have something very upfront in terms of a mission or a threshold of why this is so important in terms of creating the different kind of benefit stream that we hope for with a bend toward equity. So I just want to leave that there. I don't have all the solutions on that. I just want to say that I'd be, again, interested in put a lot of energy behind this if that's where we're headed.
Well, and I just want to say I appreciate your comments and your concern, and I think that's a focus that is the general direction that the public bank is intended to go, but it's not defined yet. And so your kind of input would help to define it for sure. And I may want to get in touch with you afterwards. We'll see. If there are no other questions, I'll go on with the presentation. Okay, so let's put up the next slide. Okay, before I go into the details, I want to go back to the Bank of North Dakota. They historically have been documented to have largely avoided the financial impacts of the crash we had or the financial meltdown we had in 2008. They largely avoided those because they didn't have much money and maybe they didn't have any money, but I don't know that for sure. But most of their money were in other securities and not in the corporate world. So they got caught in that trap. They have the lowest rate of foreclosures through that financial crash we had in the 2008 and so. They do student loans as well, and they have the lowest default rate of any large structure in the entire country. So they have a track record of what I think are success in serving the public. Their public that they serve. So I just want to add that. So let me go. You can't talk about banking if you don't talk about money. So here we go down the money road. So we can go to 14, the next slide.
Sorry again.
Okay. So what is the startup cost that's up front, and then how do you capitalize the bank? These are the two critical issues about where the cost issues have to be addressed, and it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be kind of a group process if there's going to be a group interested in this. And I'm just saying the group are public agencies, representatives of public agencies. There needs to be a viability plan or a business plan being developed. That's an upfront cost. And the initial operating costs for the first few years of a bank have to be covered. Now, both of those expenses can be recovered down the road just because you're expected to make money. I mean, and a bank is expected to make money. This is not a gratuitous operation. It's supposed to be a bank. A bank is supposed to make money, and the money they make can cover various costs. So the assumption is that you need to spend money up front before you can make money down the road. So and everybody who's interested in this needs to know that that's an expense. I have no idea what that money cost is, but I'm going to give you a scale issue. I've been very interested in the scale of what we're talking about here, and I'll show you some sense of scale a few more slides. But so the first is the startup cost. The second is capitalization. Where does the capital come from? The capital comes from money that already exists in agencies, in public agencies, county, special district, cities, of course, and people variously refer to this money as reserves or cash and cash equivalents or investments or an investment pool or surplus funds or deposit. There's just a variety of ways you refer to this. I just use the word reserves because I think that's the general catch-all that people can understand. And I'll try to explain a little bit of this too, a little bit down the road. But capitalization comes, I think, comes from money that already exists, but the startup cost is new money. Okay, next slide. So where is the capitalization money? Where is it? Every agency has reserves. Every agency invests those reserves. The state law allows a jurisdiction to invest in a public bank. So of all the variety of places that a jurisdiction can invest their reserves, now they're allowed to invest it in a public bank. This is critical because most agencies have never had a public bank available to them. What the state says, if you have a public bank, it's available to you. That's what the state law says, but you need the public bank first. But the money already exists. Where? I say agency reserves, and let me go into that a little bit. Next slide, please. So every agency has a reserves. I'm just going to pick a city, Monterey, or it could be Salinas. It could be could be the county. It doesn't matter. It could be any of the 5 counties. About 20% or so of that money that's in reserves is in cash. So that's going to stay there. And that's kind of the thing that balances things out every quarter, every 6 months, every year, every month, every payday, whatever it is. They just need a flexibility of cash that's always available. About 80% of the money that's in reserves are in 2 kinds of short-term securities. They're individual investments, and those investments are made either direct through the finance director or the treasurer or whatever, or it's made through brokers. But anyway, these are individual investments that's available to a treasurer of a city. Also, there are investment pools that they also can invest in. So you can invest in individual items, or you can invest in a pool. The pools that are known to me, Monterey County Investment Pool is a big pool. LAIF, the local agency investment pool, available. Many public agencies invest now in LAIF. Some invest in CalTrust. And I'm not sure who invests in PMIA. PMIA is a catch-all. Both CalTrust, let me back up. LAIF, LAIF, CalTrust, and PMIA are all managed at the state level. And they're available to any jurisdiction that wants to participate in that structure of investments. The Monterey County Investment Pool is managed by the county, and in Salinas, Board of Supervisors, and they have their own investment pool for other local agencies to participate in that as well. Just to back up, all schools, the community colleges and the schools have their money in county investment pool. In fact, they're kind of preempted. I don't know if it's statewide or not, but at least locally, our school districts, community colleges and school districts, have all their money invested and managed at the county level. So that's just a little fact that I discovered over the years. Okay, let's go on, please. So where is the money when I say it's here? It's available. Where is it? Where is the money? So the 7 peninsula cities, let me just add this to any of you who wish to do a little more research on your own agency or just in general about other agencies. The state requires that every public agency, special districts, I'm not sure about schools, because I really do any research on schools, but the counties and cities are required, in special districts, are required to have a quarterly investment report made to their elected body. So every quarter, there is a report that's issued by the treasurer of whoever is the finance officer of that jurisdiction. They must issue a report to their board of directors. I'll say the city council or the board of supervisors. And it's a quarterly report. Every quarter this comes out. What it does is summarize the investments. It's usually a consent calendar item because there's seldom any reason to raise questions. It's trying to keep you informed, keep the public informed, keep the council members informed. So I researched these quarterly finance reports in order to collect these numbers. I'm just trying to clarify where these numbers come from. So the 7 peninsula cities and my numbers are from like 2017, 2018. The 7 peninsula cities have about $220 million. These are all 7 cities in their reserves. The Salinas Valley 5 cities have about 225. So it's about even between the valley cities and the peninsula cities. Look at the difference though between the Monterey County investment pool. 1.8 billion. 1.8 billion. So they're just the dinosaur. I would say dinosaur. They're the big kahuna, you know, okay, in the picture. I only looked at 3 special districts, those that I'm kind of most familiar with. I'm in the water world. I just added that in because they all count. It all works. So if there's $2.3 billion in Monterey County, I'm not asking that all of this go into a public bank, not by a long shot. I'm just saying the starting point for thinking about how do we afford or how do we go forward with a public bank. And I'm interested in scale because I don't want people to be alarmed by, you know, I'm not asking, and nobody's asking for $2.3 billion to be put anywhere. All I'm saying is the source and the volume is in a large, it's a large number. It's a large number. And my estimate in the 5 counties that there's about 7 billion available. And that's a very gross estimate. And I don't want to be crucified on my numbers. I think everybody should have to do these numbers, but I'm just trying to get a sense of scale about what are we talking about. So that's the Monterey County picture. And that's only 1 county out of 5. Now we are about the 2nd largest county, Monterey is. The largest is Santa Barbara County. And so just speaking countywide, you know, not every public agency in Monterey County may join a public bank, not by a long shot, or maybe by a long shot they will. But if everybody wanted to participate, that's kind of the amount of money that could be available to capitalize a bank. And I'm not asking that that's the money that be put into, not by a long shot, not by a long shot. I'm just saying, what's the scale we're looking at? So let's go to the next slide, please. And this is just a quick one. I want to go through that. Monterey County represents about 30% of the population. So 30% of the population just gives us a benchmark on how to look forward. So if you're going to look at 30% of $2 billion, that's maybe 700 million. But how much does it take to start a bank? I'm just saying, let's just pick a number. Let's just say it takes $1 billion to start a bank. That's a far cry. That's $1 billion across all the public agencies of all 5 counties. So if Monterey County's piece of this is in the area of 30%, just because that's the population breakdown, then the scale of what we may want to look at in Monterey County is between, my bottom line there, between 300 million and 700 million. That's kind of the range. That's a far cry from 2.3 billion. So all I'm saying is some piece of the 2.3 billion could be made available to a public bank if the public bank target is $1 billion. And according to my research, you can start a bank with 100 million, not 1 billion. So there's a big scale that we can work with on how do you start a public bank. And all I'm saying is it's possible because we're not using every dollar, we're not using every jurisdiction, and we're not even know what the target is at this point. I just create the $1 billion to give a sense of, well, if we go forward and if $1 billion, I want to use numbers that are a little bit shocking to some people, but they're not shocking when you go into when you go into the details. It is shocking to start with, but it's not so shocking when you end up looking across the 5 county area. So next slide, please. So I just want to say the bank is going to be pooling money from various jurisdictions. Pooling is the power of leverage. So pooling, you know, you get more individuals and just go back to just go common bank or go to your credit union and just think of it. People put their money into a credit union or community bank for some reason, customer service, all that kind of stuff. The bank pools all that money and then leverages it for banking. That's the power of banking. And what seems to be far too, well, I mean, it's the norm. I just say not too much. The power of banking is in leverage. And so you leverage, you get a variety of you get a variety of small accounts. You pool that and you got a big sum of money. That's the source of leverage. And leverage is the power of banking. Where is that power now? The power of leveraging. Where is it? I'm saying it's mostly in Wall Street banks. There may be a little bit of it in community banks, but most of it is in Wall Street banks. And it could be a local bank. I just want you to remember, where is the power, and where does the power come from? Okay, next slide, please. So Wall Street banks have so these various agencies that invest their money somewhere, and much of it is in corporate structures, and much of it is even managed by corporate players, big players. So the corporate banks now, in the structure that exists today, much of the deposits that they get from California governments all over the state. I mean, just think back for a minute and just trigger down your scale of thinking. We're about the 5th or 6th largest, California is, the largest economy in the world. And there's lots and lots and lots of money in the banking system from California. So corporate Wall Street banks take billions. They charge larger fees than a public structure. They hold and manage the deposits. Granted, good, they maximize profits because that's their focus. But they do that through fees and investment interest rates and management fees, whatever they may be, and their investments and so on. They benefit shareholders. They also have a different agenda, which is on national and international financing, and they mix deposits, which are supposed to be protected in a banking structure, and they mix that with speculative investments, and that's what led to the problem in 2008, 8 and 9 area. So what I'm saying is that the leverage, the money that's deposited with the corporate structure, leaves town because the banks the money that has the money doesn't have our county as a primary focus. Their issue is make money to make money, and they do it to benefit shareholders. And the leverage, the potential, the banking structure, and the banking priority, and the banking power leaves town. So now, next slide, please. With a local bank, leverage stays home. And this goes to my kind of public interest issues in general. If it's locally managed, chances are there's going to be more local benefits. You know who the people are. They're kind of within reach. Not that yet. Okay. So with a public bank, the local funds are the source of the investment, and there's local control of the leverage. It's a 5-county structure. The lending is for local projects and local priorities. The same security regulations apply as private banks do. There's a collateralization, which means there's a backup document supporting the assets that you have and the loan commitments that you have. It brings democracy and transparency to banking. Any public bank is going to have to meet Brown Act requirements and Public Records Act requirements. And it allows investment and divestiture choices. I say that because that is a common kind of reference about, well, I don't want to invest in, I don't know, fossil fuels or cigarettes, I'm going to say, or armaments or whatever. You can do that. You have control over where that money goes. You really don't have control if it leaves town into the national Wall Street banks. So let me just give you a little game here, and it's not a game, but next slide, please. Let me just get to my slide here a second, my notes. So back about so my chart here, you can't read the small print, but the far left chart shows about 1990 to 1995. So that's a 5-year period. There's a list of 37 banks there. That's all, just a list of 37 banks. But I just want to show you what happened with consolidation of the banking world. And it's kind of, it's cleverly titled The Big Bank Theory, too big to fail. And that's a common criticism of just the financial structure we have nationally and internationally now. But back in 1990, there were over 16,000 banks chartered in the entire country, in the entire United States. By 2021, this is bring to date. So this is a 30-year period, is it? Yeah, 30-year period. We have about 5,500 banks, total banks. So we've reduced the number of banks. Now, granted, a bank may have, multiple outlets. So there may be banking outlets everywhere, but who owns the money? Who controls the money? Who makes demands on the politicians? And at whatever level they're active in, state, federal, I don't know if there's much county, much at the local level. But the point is the number of banks. This is a picture of what the number of banks over a 10-year period. And this only goes up to 2009. So let me just make a very quick statement here. In 1990, the far left, there are 37 of these banks. 5 years later, 10 years later, 2000, there were 20 banks. These are the consolidations or the acquisitions or the buyouts of various ways that led to where we are on the far right. 10 years later, there were 11 banks. And as of 2010, which was the banking crisis we all remember, there were 4. These big 4, Citigroup, JP Morgan, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. They resulted from the consolidation and the acquisition of other banks. So the power that exists with these 4 banks is enormous compared to what things were 30 years ago. That's what we're kind of up against, is the power of the banking. Anyway, the power of banking. And so they've become too big to fail. I just think that's a very interesting chart to me. So next slide, please. We're getting near the end.
George, are you taking questions now, or would
No,
you
just in a few minutes, if I can hold. No, I'll take a few minutes. Yeah.
No, oh, okay. So this is pretty overwhelming
Yeah,
and
okay.
scary. So the question is, credit unions, are we going to get into those, or that's for another topic?
No, I can say that the law that allows for public banks to be created has a very specific provision that public banks are prohibited from competing with credit unions and community banks. Those are 2 financing structures that deal with local communities, a local population basis as well. And so public banks cannot compete. They can cooperate. They can join together on a common project. So let's just say a public bank, let's say a community bank might be faced with, I'm going to make this up because I don't know, a bridge that needs to be whatever. One of the national banks may not be very interested in it. A community bank will, because it's just, maybe it's a little bit too large, or maybe I'm not so sure. It's based on the collateral that's kind of put forward. But if it's a size issue, then a public bank can cooperate with the community bank in order to finance a larger project at the local level. That's a terrific advantage of a public bank. You can do larger projects locally, and you don't have to depend on a larger bank to carry that loan or issue that loan.
Terrific, thank
you. But you can't compete. That's prohibited.
All right, next slide then.
So I just think we have a choice, and I'm going to go back to my very first statement that I just opened up here. I think the potential of a public bank is just pretty widespread and pretty interesting. It has local control. I think there are money reasons why a public bank can be supported, and it's a positive thing to go forward. It's a structural thing to go forward. It's a financing thing to go forward. And it's all positive. It's getting things done, not just opposing something. I love that part of it. So now we have a choice. continue with Wall Street Bank priorities, because that's where a lot of our investments go now. The various agencies that I'm talking about, cities and county, now invest in Wall Street securities. There's an option of putting some of that money into a local bank, which is local control and local priority. So we can have that, or we can have something new. Public banking is flexible. It does earn an income. It pays back the agencies that are participating. There's flexibility. There's income that can also be added to local choices. And I'm just convinced that we can do this. And all I'm asking to start with is be curious enough to try to check it out. Next slide, please. And so the reminder that I'm asking people who may be here on this review is to call or email or write or whatever it is, your county officials, your city officials, and just ask them, would you please explore public banking? I like it. Why can't you? And would you adopt some kind of resolution to help evaluate the things going forward? And I'll ask again to remind you that if your own group, whatever that is, might be willing to support going forward, we're open to any kind of local support of that. This was a very important piece of the San Francisco momentum and the East Bay momentum, and we're trying to create a little more of that momentum here in our 5-county area. Next slide. I think I'm right near the end.
Okay, and there was one question in the chat from a little while ago, which was who or what does the actual banking? This comes from Michael Dempsey.
Well, it's a little bit like the Monterey Bay community power structure. It started out saying we need a board of directors. We don't have it yet, but we need it. And the decision will be made by a board of directors. It's kind of like a city council or a JPA. When you form a public agency of a collection of public agencies, you have to create a decision body. This would have to be done. So when somebody asks who, it would have to be formed. But it wouldn't be public officials. It would be people who know banking. It would be people who know, the finance world. I don't know how many city officials you could look at and say, oh, I would trust him with my money or her. We're not going down that road. That's not the point. There may be some elected officials on a board of directors, but it would be managed by people who know banking. People. I'm going to go back to Matt Horta, other who said something other. He's had some experience in this. Anybody who's had some experience in the banking world or the financing world would be a pretty attractive person who you would want on a board of directors. And Matt, you're new to me, but so maybe we can talk. Anyway, that's my answer to that question of curiosity. So this is just for more information, and if you need this information, you can get it. Whatever. My email is at the very bottom, but there are other sources of public banking information, and our contact for maybe, well, anyway, it's there. Karen Araujo will be collecting information. I will be too. And then the others are more statewide related banking information. But those are the references. And so now my last slide is just Q&A. So
could you please put that slide in the chat? Let's see if I can do this for you. Okay, it is now in the chat.
Great, thank you. So if there are other questions or comments or criticisms or skepticism or whatever.
Whoops. And I'm having trouble stopping sharing. There we go. All right. Any other questions or comments? Let's see.
George, outstanding presentation. I heard from pretty good sources it takes about $20 million to start a bank. With those figures you have, with the 5 counties, wow, we could open up a lot of banks at 20 million a pop. What do you think about that? Well,
I've read things that are at the very other end of the scale. I mean, I've read 10 million, you could start a bank. Well, I imagine a 10 million is probably in a small community. Yeah. I've just jumped it to 100 million to think, well, that may be kind of a minimum. When I say it takes $1 billion, I think I'm being generous. For the information that I've read and the studies that I've looked at for starting banks and so on. And no, I just don't buy the 20 million, Frank. I don't buy that. In fact, that's probably more money than all the public agencies in the 5 counties have in reserves. So if that's required, then I'll stop talking.
Yeah.
The advocacy would stop.
Wells Fargo, here we come.
Yeah, Fargo. But in a way, Frank, you've raised an interesting question, because nobody is coming forward with what it takes to start a bank. So there's the research that I've done, and I'm willing to put the numbers out there because I think people need to have a sense of scale. And if you don't have a sense of scale, then you don't know what the hell you're getting into. And so I'm kind of running a little bit of a risk, and I just say this, but it's also based on research. So I'm not just coming from nowhere. I'm also not a banker, so I'm not saying that I am. But the research I've done and the agencies, the public agency people that I've been working with, and the information that I have about the size of reserves in public agencies, the scale I'm talking about seems to fit the financing capability of the 5 county area. And again, I'm only focused on Monterey County. Yeah. And and I just say a lot of this has to be confirmed, and I'm asking you to confirm as well. If you look at a public agency agenda and you look for a quarterly investment report, you can look at the same numbers that I'm looking at and see if, I add them all up. So anyway, the information is there. The most interesting one would be the county, because they have the most money by far the most money. So if you look at a county's
Assets.
quarterly investment report,
Yeah.
you can see what I'm talking about. It'll be 1.8 million.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 1.8 billion.
Matt's
It's a B.
Matt's got a question. He says, are there specific projects that are looking for this new resource, and what does the pipeline look like?
Pipeline makes me think water, so it's I know that's not what you meant. No, there are no public projects out right now. The highest priority given in the analysis I read, and it's it's 120 page analysis in the city of San Francisco. Affordable housing is the absolute highest priority that they see. Everybody knows that. I mean, I won't say everybody. Most people know that affordable housing doesn't pencil out for a developer. But if a jurisdiction needs to have some affordable housing, momentum going forward, and they need units, and the private developer is not going to pencil out for them, some public subsidy, some public support is going to have to write down those costs. And San Francisco has gone into quite a bit of detail about how they can write down costs on public housing. Affordable housing, I'll say, not public housing. So that is a high priority, is affordable housing. And there are no projects in any pipeline going forward. What we're trying to do is see if there's a way to set up an optional financing structure for any public interest project. And that's why I say loan to businesses. That's why I say employee-based ownership businesses, employee-owned businesses. I just say, what could a public agency do to kind of help their community? And whatever that is, infrastructure is pretty standard. Affordable housing is kind of the emerging issue. And so is loans to the underserved communities. And they could be communities of color. And that's a high priority issue, because how do you kind of maintain the viability of your larger community when the full section of participants in that community are not equally kind of have an equal access to financing? So if only successful businesses can get access to money, what happens to those that are on the cutting edge or the beginning part? And if you screw those people, or I won't say I mean that, if you can't serve them, then you're really not helping your community. So public banking allows for these social justice or underserved or minority owned or new or just a cross section of economic activity in your community. And if you're in a position to want to support that diversity, then a public bank can do that.
And by the way, so there's a couple of questions coming in, and also just I put sort of one of the key books for understanding public banking, The Public Bank Solution from Austerity to Prosperity by Ellen Brown. I put a link to that in the chat.
Good.
And then also Matt's comment in response, and then I see Rachel's comment, so let me complete this with Matt though. He says, public agencies can help by investing in covering infrastructure in support of affordable housing. Water, sanitation, dry utility upgrades, transportation, environmental remediation of infill sites. Right, excellent point. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So Rachel's comment question is, could the startup costs come from venture capitalists at all? Angel investors who may be more interested in the public benefit rather than turning a big profit on their investments?
Good question. We're not looking for angel investors, and I don't think it's an attractive thing for angel investments in general, because angel investors want to get something in the long run. Not necessarily. If it's a social justice or a social goodwill kind of effort, community foundations might be willing to help underwrite some of the costs in order to have a little different financing structure available to their broader community, because they also have a community focus, community foundations. And so it's not an angel investor so much that yes, I say it's available to them. I just don't know how interested they might be, but they're people that have large assets. I mean, look at the land trust financing. The land trusts they keep going because somebody has a public interest issue in an asset that they have, and they're willing to turn that asset over at a deal of some kind, but it's also a gift. So it's not like, you got, a $10 million piece of property you want to kind of donate somewhere. They're willing to say, well, you can have it for 5. If I can get 2 years or two more million of tax credits for it. And so it's a gift in a way, and they lose money in the process, and it is a gift to the public arena. And so there may be angel investors in some fashion. It's way too early to talk about that kind of stuff, but I don't think any of that is out of the realm of possibility.
Other questions or comments? Okay. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I think that sums it up. You have George Riley's email down. Hold on. Michael says public banking would do much more on the local level. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I see no more comments. All right. So you have George's email. And for those who are watching this after the fact, we'll be sending it out in an email and posting it on YouTube. So all of this information will be in the comments section there. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the questions. I want to say that because it helps clarify. If one person has a question, somebody else is probably sitting there with something similar. So I'm just glad that I'm glad to get the questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we look forward to being continued contact, and thank you everyone for being here. Thanks. Thanks, George.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.